Hey friends, welcome back to Huge Head Studio. My name is Robbie, and today we are sculpting one of the most resilient characters in cinematic history. The only knight who can be reduced to a torso and still confidently call it a draw. Today we are making the Black Knight from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So lately I've been introducing my kids to all the movies that I loved as a kid, and we're working our way through a handful of the dumbest but most quotable movies like Napoleon Dynamite and Nacho Libre, seeing as how half my personality and vocal stems are based on those movies. So naturally I thought it'd be great to introduce them to Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which is another movie I annoyingly quote whenever the opportunity arises. But according to my children, the movie looks too old, therefore they did not want to watch it. So, to make myself feel better, I kicked them out of my house and decided to sculpt my favorite character from the movie instead. They may not respect one of the greatest comedies ever made, but maybe they'll respect my mediocre sculpture inspired by it. Probably not, but you never know till you try, so let's give it a shot and have some fun. My plan for this here Black Knight is to make a little huge head version of him, a caricaturized style with a big ol' head on top of an exaggerated and sometimes unintentionally cute body. I always try to gather some reference to make my sculptures and paintings at least somewhat true to the original subject, but I do tend to take artistic liberties at times either due to laziness or my often immature sense of humor. In this case, while rewatching the scene, if you look closely, the Black Knight is wearing shoes. But for the most part, he looks like he's wearing a chainmail version of some big boy footy pajamas, which totally adds to the ridiculousness of the character in my opinion, so that is the concept here with these goofy looking feet. For the arms, I decided to sculpt him mid-fight with Arthur, right after the first limb is severed, so peak confidence, right at the point of 'tis but a scratch. Though, looking at it now, probably would have been way cooler if I'd made it so all the limbs were removable, like a fully interactive dismemberment feature. Man, all the best ideas show up after the project's already finished. It's like when you're lying in bed after an argument and 3 hours later your brain goes, oh, that's what I should have said, but it's too late. Moment's gone, just like his arm. Oh well, I may have missed that opportunity, but I did make a sword out of a popsicle stick, which I guess is pretty cool or whatever. Anyway, I used some sandpaper to shape the popsicle stick to look like it has an edge, and then I used the rounded tip to my advantage, giving the sword a slightly cartoony look. Then I made a guard out of clay and superglued some little decorative bits onto the guard to make it feel more like the Black Knight's sword. I also drilled a hole into the guard so I could pressure fit a dowel onto the hole that I'll use as the hilt. I cut it to size and then got started on the hand. I have fat fingers, so hands can be pretty tricky at the best of times. For this project, we only had one hand to sculpt, so it should have been easy peasy, right? Haha, not if I have anything to say about it. I sculpted the hand and everything looked great until I attached it to the hilt and realized I just made a left hand for a character with no left arm. Easy enough fix though, just remove the hand and bend everything the other way and voila, the left hand is now a right hand. Problem solved. Until I put it on the body and realized it was just way too big. Like, I want to exaggerate the features, sure, but I don't want the Black Knight to look like he's wearing Hulk hands. So I took it off and made a smaller one which fit a lot better. After that, I built up the arm by wrapping little strips of clay around it and then blended them together before I started carving in some wrinkles. I like to brush on a little rubbing alcohol before using the ball stylus to make the wrinkles because it softens the surface, so when I use the ball the grooves carve in cleanly with soft edges. Otherwise the tool can snag on the clay and leave chunky, ugly ridges. I then wrap another strip around the wrist and blend it into the hand to create a glove and then drape a bit of clay I rolled flat with my pasta maker over the body so I can scope out the measurements to cut it into his what do you call this, a tunic or a surcoat or something? Whatever the fancy medieval fighting dress is called, I cut it to shape and then blend it into the body. Then I press a line into the dress to create a belt line before using the ball stylus and rubbing alcohol again to carve some wrinkles and folds into the fabric to give it a blouse look from the belt. Next I add a little round bit for his chainmail collar, which we'll talk about later, and then I rolled some Super Sculpey flat to make the belt. As I've said in other videos, I like to use Super Sculpey for all areas that need a smooth finish like the belt and the helmet that we'll make shortly, as it's nice and firm and it won't warp as easy as softer clays. I attached the belt with some bacon bond and then realized like the hand it was just too thick and looked stupid, so I peeled it back off and rolled a new strip a little thinner, which in my opinion looks much better. I then wrapped a bit of armature wire around a paintbrush to get it nice and round for the belt buckle and then added whatever this thing is because he wears it in the movie and that's as far as my concepts go sometimes. Anyway, with the body done, we're ready to make the helmet. I started by rolling up some aluminum foil for bulk and then wrapped it in some flattened original Sculpey for a little more volume. Like I mentioned before, I usually use Super Sculpey for the finish layer because it's smoother and better for that metallic look, but this is just an underlayer, so the cheaper, friendlier clay works perfectly for now. I then added some eyeballs because even though the Black Knight really doesn't show his face, if you look closely you can see his eyes here and there, and I thought some big Marvin the Martian type eyes would really add to the ridiculousness of the sculpt. Next, I added some bacon bond to the surface to help attach a roll of Super Sculpey because the Super Sculpey isn't quite as sticky or clingy as the softer clays, so the bacon bond helps prevent any separation. Which I think is necessary as the helmet has to hold together because even though the Black Knight loses all of his limbs, his helmet never falters. I add a few more decorative strips to the helmet to make sure it resembles the Black Knight's helmet, and then continue that effort with a flat tip tool to poke in a handful of clean and consistent rectangular vent holes. I threw it in the oven to bake, and then once cooled, I sanded the top until it was nice and flat and smooth, and then added some little rivets to the helmet using liquid Sculpey off screen, and then baked it one last time before starting the paint. I kicked off the paint with a primer coat of the flattest black that I own. I hand brushed it on instead of airbrushing to make sure it got into all the little nooks and crannies. Then I used a dry brush to add some metallic black as a base for the chainmail. While sculpting, I realized I had absolutely no plan for how to make the chainmail look like chainmail. A more dedicated artist without ADD would probably painstakingly carve every single link to bring it to life. Me, I have the attention span of a squirrel who just discovered Red Bull, so as always I decided to put this problem in the hands of future me by fixing it with paint. So I took a stab at stippling on a few layers of various metallic paints to try to imply the chainmail look, and then moved on to sketching in and then painting the warthog thing on his fancy medieval fighting dress. Once that was done, I took another look at the chainmail and decided it was not black enough for the Black Knight, so I brushed on a black wash over all of the chainmail. The wash is transparent but still stained, so it allows me to keep the stippling I added earlier while toning down the shine a bit. I added the same wash to the hog on the dress to give it depth, and then used a bit of light black that I guess is also sometimes referred to as gray to give a bit of subtle highlights to the folds on the dress so it's not so flat. After that, I added some red to the severed arm, but kept it bright and playful instead of gory to make sure the knight who loses all of his limbs in battle stays light and cheery for the kids. Then I added a glossier black to the belt and to the glove to give them a shinier and more leathery look than the cottonish look of the fancy medieval fighting dress. I also added a bit of metallic paint to the belt buckle thing and then moved on to the sword. I gave it a base of a metallic gunmetal paint and then painted the other side with a brighter metallic steel to try to help the sword look double beveled in a diamond shape. I then added some highlights and lowlights to each side accordingly to push the shine of the sword and make it look like metal instead of a sanded painted popsicle stick. The body done, we move on to the helmet. The Black Knight's helmet looks like a dark weathered steel, so to try to achieve that look, I dry brushed on some metallic gunmetal paint and then used a hard bristle brush to dry brush on hints of metallic steel and glossy black here and there to get the texture I'm looking for. Then I used the lighter steel paint to dab on a highlight onto each rivet to push the shine a little further. Once pleased with the metal look, I applied an off-white base coat to the eyes and then blended in some tight white around the pupil to make them look rounded and not so flat. I also brushed in some redness because I'm sure losing all of your limbs is pretty stressful, and then filled in the pupil with a simple black. Now all that's left to do is make the base look less boring, so I sprayed it with some spray adhesive and then dabbed on a layer of flocking powder. I then added some fall colored leaves before adding one final coat of flocking powder, and with that the sculpt is done and ready to be assembled. So Arthur can disassemble him again. As always, I hope you enjoyed this dumb little project, and if you did, be sure to like and subscribe so you can see what kind of nonsense we come up with next. I also appreciate you putting up with my voice this week, as I'm sick and I know I sound like the kids from Rocket Power when they got Fiji Flu. I always used to think I had a great immune system, turns out I just didn't have children. But anyway, that about does it for the Black Knight, so thanks for watching and I'll see you on the next one.